Good morning. Good morning. Hope everybody's well this morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you for those that are joining online. We appreciate your participation in our class as well. As you know, we have been studying 1 Samuel in this class. And last week, Alan taught us, and we covered the chapters where David and the famous epic story, true story, of David and Goliath. And so, kind of a famous story. Even as a child, I think we enjoyed that story. And it wasn't just a lesson about small guy beats big guy. It was God was on somebody's side, and he wasn't on somebody else's side. When I was living in Memphis, this has been a long time ago, and my daughter was probably 4 or 5, we used to do Bible stories at night before bed. And sometimes we would act out the stories. And she would be David, and I would be Goliath in this story. And as you can imagine how that went, me falling over. But I would always ask her, how come David was able to beat Goliath? And she had had this story before, so she knew the answer. She said, because God was on his side. And that's the story not only of 1 Samuel, but throughout the Bible, that if we have God on our side, we can do most anything. When we were in Israel 3 years ago, we went to the Valley of Elah, which is where that battle took place. And so I'm going to show you a few pictures that I took when we were there. It's not very fancy of a place. It's a field or a plain or valley between two kind of sets of hills on either side. Looking in one direction, you can see the hills. Maybe you can imagine the Philistines camped over there on those hills. This is one of the few places we went that didn't have some kind of church or national monument or something to commemorate the event that took place there. It's just a field with hills. But interesting enough, but it's even a little hard to get to. We had to pull over off the side of almost like an interstate and get off and walk through a path to get back here. So it's not something that tourists, or as many tourists, go to. This is looking the other way to another set of hills. Maybe you can imagine the Israelites camped over there. And this is normally, some seasons, some seasons, it's a stream, a brook, which would have been the brook where David took his 5 smooth stones. And yes, I did take 5 smooth stones from there, and they didn't discourage you from doing that because they knew tourists were going to do it anyway. But also, I was told by the guide that they bring in a dump truck of rocks every so often and fill it up again because it's picked clean, by the tourists. But anyway, that would have been the brook where David got his 5 stones. That's somebody you would know, Daniel and John and Paul coming up from the stream. I'm guessing they had their 5 smooth stones too. And this is just another random picture I saw of a shepherd and a sheep. Now, they're not dressed like the shepherds that we see in our Bible story books. They're dressed more modern now, but you can see a lone shepherd there with his sheep, and he's taking care of them. So just thought I'd share those pictures for you. This is, of course, Michelangelo's depiction of David. Now, I don't know what David looked like, and Michelangelo doesn't really either. But he in his imagination, Michelangelo's, this is what he looked like. And of course, it's a very famous, probably considered the most famous sculpture in the world. But that's his depiction of David. That's a little bit closer up of his face. Amazing sculpturing, though, as you might imagine, from Michelangelo. But you can see the veins in his hand and all that. And it was just quite incredible that he was able to do that. Today we're going to pick up right after David defeats Goliath. he's just had the battle. And at the very end of chapter 17, it says that he and Saul had a little conversation. Saul first asked, well, who is that boy? And who's his father? What's his father's name? And so Abner, his chief of his army, brings David to Saul, and they have a little conversation there. And so in chapter 18, verse 1, the very first verses is after David had finished talking with Saul. So this is just right after that conversation. Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword and his bow and his belt. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army, and this pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. So David had just killed Goliath, and then Jonathan and David formed this special friendship. They were kind of like best friends. I wonder what made them become so deep friends so fast, but I think one of the things is Jonathan just observed him kill Goliath. And if you remember a few weeks ago, we studied Jonathan, and he was reliant on God. He was, when he went into battle with the Philistines, you remember from a few chapters back, he said, if God be with us, we can do anything. And he said, if God wants us to do it, he'll have this sign for us, and he did. So both of them had this deep faith in God. And I think that was attractive to Jonathan, that David had that same kind of faith that he had. That would have been one thing. There are probably some other explanations, maybe. That would be my first guess. But if you've been in battle, I've never served in the armed forces, but I know people that have, and especially from World War II, those men sometimes form really tight bonds once they've been in battle together. And I don't know, maybe there's something about that warrior kinship that maybe attracted them. But either way, I'm guessing the first one. But they formed a really fast and deep friendship. It says that Jonathan gave David his robe, his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. These probably weren't your average sword, bow, tunic, robe, and belt. These were the prince's, the equipment of the prince, the son of the king, who would have been expected to assume the kingship after his father passed away. So he would probably have had special equipment, and he gave them to David. And it was almost as if Jonathan was acknowledging that David would be the king instead of himself. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I think he knew that God was with David, and he loved him so much he was willing to give up these items of his own. And it says that God was with David, giving him success in all that he did. Again, like my daughter when she was 5, God was on his side. And that's what saw him through a lot of different things, as we'll see going forward in not only today's lesson, but future lessons. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but we with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. So Saul was jealous. That's kind of the theme of the chapter that we're studying from the book. The title was A Jealous King. for these 2 chapters. And Saul was definitely jealous of David. But Saul already knew, remember from a couple of chapters back, he already knew that God had taken from him the kingdom, and the Spirit of God had come away from him and onto David. So I'm not sure what he would have expected, that David would not, why would he expect that David wouldn't have a lot of success? I read one commentator who said this statement where the women were dancing and they were saying Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000, wasn't really meant to put David above Saul. That this was poetic language from the time, and that often tens of thousands versus thousands was equal. They were praising both Saul and David, but certainly that's not the way Saul took it. He saw it as they're giving David a lot more praise than for me, and he was very jealous of that. Saul was not grateful and excited that David's success was beneficial to the nation of Israel and it was from God. That happens a lot in our life today. I think we see people who get jealous about things instead of being happy for them or happy for the fact that they did something very beneficial for others. And in this case, David had done something very beneficial for Israel. That giant had been out there for days and maybe weeks defying God. The Philistines were there and if Goliath had won, they were going to pounce all over Israel. But in fact, the reverse happened. And so, and they made the Philistines flee after that occurrence. So that was very beneficial to Israel's protection and for their security. But in his eyes, his thoughts were only selfish thoughts. And, selfishness has not gone. Selfishness is present with us today. I think I've said in some other classes before that the number one cause of marriages not happening, not continuing or lasting, is selfishness on the part of one or the other or both. Selfishness, we see around us, people get happy about what they've done but don't really perceive it as a good thing when somebody else is successful. And so selfishness is something that Saul dealt with, but we feel we deal with it today as well. There's a statement in the book that we use from Ed Weber. He says, if praise humbles us, God can use us. If praise puffs us up, we are not ready for God to use us. So when somebody praises you, as they did David was very humble, and we can see this in some of the future verses we're going to look at. Saul, on the other hand, was not. And if it puffs us up, we're not ready for God. We're not ready for God to use us. By the way, if there's any comment or statement or question you'd like to make at any time, please feel free to do that. Just raise your hand or call out my name. My name's Mike. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. And everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Interesting comment there at the beginning that an evil spirit was sent from God. We don't really think of anything evil coming from God, do we? I was trying to kind of understand this better, and one commentator described this as the fact that God is over all of the evil spirits in that realm, even though they're evil. remember in Job, Satan is out there roaming the earth, and God allows him to do certain things, but he could have not allowed him to do certain things. So there is some control that God has, and that maybe in this case, God is using this evil spirit to punish Saul because of his arrogance and disobedience. Whatever the case, this spirit affected him so that he became less kind to David and tries to kill him. This is not the only time he tries to kill him. This is just maybe the first. And so he says he did it twice here. I can just see this picture of David over here by a harp, and then, Saul's got this big spear and tries to pin him to the wall. That must have been probably impressive. But David was elusive. Obviously, God was going to protect David because David was his chosen king. But he eluded the spear in this case, and then in some other future cases, he's going to elude Saul's attempts to kill him. It says Saul was afraid of David. I think sometimes people are afraid of those who are better than them, or maybe a threat to him. And he is a threat in a way for his kingdom. David is going to be king. David doesn't assume that. He's very humble about it. But the fact is, God had already chosen David to be the future king. And the people loved David. Saul was afraid of David, but the people loved David. And we're going to see that some more as well. And God was with David, obviously. Saul said to David, "Here's my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." But David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that..." I lost my place. So that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, "Now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law." So interestingly, Saul was even weaponizing his daughters against David. He was going to, the first one, he said, the Philistines will take care of him. I don't have to raise a hand. And then later, Michal, she'll be a snare to him. And I don't know how he knew that. But somehow she was going to make him vulnerable. And Saul was using his daughters to find a way to get to David, which is obviously not a good fatherly position to take, I think. He was devising ways that David could be killed, implicating himself for murdering one that the people loved. So if he had killed him, maybe if those spears had hit him earlier, since David was so popular, that might not have gone well for Saul. But he thought that, if I could do it so it doesn't like I'm doing it, like these Philistines, or when Michal's a snare to him, maybe I can get him killed, which is my goal, and they won't blame me. Remember back when when David was talking to the people about Goliath being there, and he said, "What will be done for the Israelite who kills this uncircumcised Philistine?" And they said one of the things that he would receive would be a daughter of the king in marriage. So the first daughter was promised because of him killing Goliath, but Saul reneged on that promise. He didn't give her to him as promised. But then it occurred to him that his second daughter would be a snare to him, and I guess because they had told him that Michal loved David, that this would be sort of an opportunity for him. But regardless, I think none of these things really worked out for Saul. Then Saul ordered his attendants, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David, but David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and a little known." Again, David's humility. When Saul's servants told him that what David had said, Saul replied, "Say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king so that David might become the king's son-in-law. And then Saul gave him the daughter Michal in marriage. As I pointed out, David shows his humility here, and Saul wanted to take that and turn it into a way to have him killed. It's interesting. First of all, Saul had promised the first wife because he killed Goliath. Now he reneges on the first daughter, and then the second daughter, now he's asking for something from David that is probably would be considered impossible. And he's expecting him to get killed trying to achieve this. And interesting too that, normally it's the daughter's family that pays, I guess sometimes it's both, the dowry when one's being married. But anyway, Saul assumed that he was going to get killed trying to meet this requirement to be Michal, to have Michal. But Saul didn't really count on God being with David, or maybe he just underestimated God. God will be with him to an extent, but 100 Philistines, foreskins, that's pretty much an impossible task. But David not only met the requirement, he doubled it. Again, because of God's being with him. So Saul's plan sort of backfires. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David went with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. So Saul's plans to kill David backfired, and he becomes even more successful and more popular among the armies of Israel and the people. So the soldiers, the officers, all highly respected David, loved him, and so did the general population that loved him. So Saul is feeling the heat because of that. He's afraid because he thinks David will take his kingdom, and eventually he does, but maybe not the way that Saul thought. So that's the end of chapter 18. Before we go into 19, any comments, thoughts, questions? All right. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David, but Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David, for he has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." So at least for the moment, Saul kind of softens his position with David instead of just trying to kill him outright. In this passage, it seems that Saul has become a little less subtle about his desire to kill David and asks Jonathan and others to do it for him. Again, not getting his own hands dirty, but getting somebody else to do it for him. And in this case, Jonathan defends David. And that's even more important because this would have been Jonathan's kingdom after Saul, and yet he's defending David, the one that will eventually be king. And he's kind of going against his own father, the king. And so maybe Jonathan was risking his life, especially considering how unstable Saul had been lately and how obsessed he was with killing David. So Jonathan took some risk to defend David to his father. And, David is a very important person in the Bible because he would eventually go on to write all the Psalms. He would unite the kingdom of Israel, and through David's lineage, the Messiah would come. So no wonder Satan was determined to kill David. Through Saul, Satan was acting, and yet God was with him and protected him. And it's kind of amazing that such a great son would belong to such a wicked father in this case. And I got to speculating in my mind why that would be. How did Jonathan turn out so good and rely on God and be humble, and yet his father was right the opposite? And, I thought maybe, and this is just speculation, but maybe because when Jonathan was young, the Lord was with Saul. And maybe when those formative years, maybe, Saul was a little bit more reliant on God, and maybe he was a little bit more humble than he became later. I don't know. It's just kind of very interesting that there's such a contrast between the father and son. Usually they say an acorn doesn't fall too far from the tree, that, sons are like their fathers in a lot of ways. But in this case, they're quite opposite. Maybe somebody else have another solution to that answer, but that's the only one I could come up with. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Once more, war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul. He was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed and covered it with a garment and putting some goat's hair on his head. So once again, we have this evil spirit from the Lord, and again, we describe what that might mean. Maybe as part of the punishment of Saul. But God was going to protect David anyway, so no matter how many spears, this is the third time that he's thrown a spear at David, and all three times he eludes it. Now, I would assume Saul's a pretty good marksman with a spear. He's been in battle. He's been a soldier. He's a big guy. He's head and shoulders above all the rest of the Israelites. So I would expect him to be pretty good typically. But in this case, he missed all three times. And Michal also defends David. She hides the fact that he's left by putting this idol in the bed and putting hair on it so that they would think that it's him. And you'll see later, she claims that he's sick. But so everyone seems to see David as a hero and they love him except Saul. But then I had a question. What was she doing with an idol? She used an idol to hide David's, to make it look like David was still in bed. And I don't know the answer. It doesn't tell us. I know that idolatry was, Israel's Achilles heel throughout their time after they got to Canaan, and even before. Remember, even in the wilderness, they made the golden calf. And we know that when, I get my heroes mixed up, Isaac, Jacob. When Jacob was leaving from his father-in-law's place, Rachel hid idols under her saddle. Remember that? Even Jacob, a really religious, godly man, had a wife that was worshiping idols. And it appears maybe, in this case, Michal was too. Idolatry was common. It was not accepted by God, of course. In fact, he was very a jealous God in that respect, and does not accept that the people worshipped idols, but they did. When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, "He is ill." Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "Bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed and the head with some goat hair. Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal told him, "He said to me, let me get away. Why should I kill you?" So she was saying that David threatened to kill her, and that's why she did it. But that was obviously not true, and so she didn't have it. So when David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naioth and stayed there. Word came to Saul, "David is in Naioth at Ramah." So he sent men to capture him. But when they saw a group of prophets prophesying, with Samuel standing there as their leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "Over at Ramah," they said. So David thinks he's in danger. Saul's out to kill him, and who does he go to? He goes to Samuel. He knew that Samuel was the prophet, the priest, and judge for God. He was a godly man. He wanted to go to a godly person. And so I wanted to ask maybe of ourselves, do we turn to godly men and women we are unsure of our direction or when we are afraid? Do we accept their advice, or would we prefer advice from a worldly source? I think sometimes we make the mistake of going to the wrong people for advice. Yes, John?
Is this the same Ramah that's mentioned, there'll be lamenting in Ramah?
Yes. And you remember back in previous chapters, that's where Samuel was from. That was his hometown. And Ramah, and it's not far from Bethlehem. So, and Samuel was born there, and he always went back there. Even when he was working in Shiloh with Eli, that's where his father and mother was from Ramah. Someone else? Yes. We're going to get to that. I'll go ahead and jump into it. So the definition that I've received from commentators is something like praising God at the direction of the Holy Spirit. So again, I've never witnessed this, but apparently they kind of lost control. The Spirit takes control of them, and they praise God. And so it's a positive thing. It's not, and they're not preaching sermons because you'd have to stay in one place and you have to be people there to listen to it. But it was just that they were controlled by the Spirit, and they were praising God as they went along. That's what the best commentary I've seen about it. There may be something more to it than that. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Right. So I'm sorry for those online and those that couldn't hear her. She was asking about what does it mean when they says they were prophesying? And she said, typically, when I think about prophecy, I think about foretelling of the future. And yet I don't believe that's what this is. I think this is a spontaneous indwelling, if you will, the Spirit that caused them to praise God, and everybody kind of could recognize it as something that was unusual. It was something different. I don't know anything more than that about it. Other comments? Those are good questions. So David turns to Samuel because he's a godly man, and that's what we probably should do, is to turn to godly people for advice rather than maybe worldly sources, which we sometimes turn to. And do we turn to God in prayer when we have these troubled times or insecure times or times we're worried? Who do we turn to? Do we turn to godly people and to God, or do we turn to people of the world? I think it's important that we turn to God and to godly people. And to your comment, prophesying, that's the best explanation I had. Praising God with direction from the Spirit was the definition that I got. Naoth means habitations or dwelling. This is where they said that they were. And so maybe Naoth is a complex of dwellings where a group of prophets resided. So it was, obviously there were other prophets there, and I don't know what that means, if that's foretelling the future or not, those prophets that might live there. But a group of them, and so that may be what that means when it says Naoth it's a place for those people. So Saul went to Naoth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along prophesying until he became to Naoth. He stripped off his garments, and he prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay naked all that night and all that day. This is why people say, is Saul also among the prophets? So even Saul is possessed by this spirit, which stops him from his pursuit to David. So just like the evil spirit was forced upon Saul, I think this was probably forced on him too. This was not by his choice. No matter what direction Saul seems to take, God causes him to be defeated, especially as protection of David is concerned. So he's pursuing David. His intent is to kill David, and he's stopped in his tracks by this spirit that dwells in him. No, we don't see that happening around us today, but it happened there, and God was behind it. So in your life, do you have a Goliath, someone that is formidable, maybe someone who berates you or gives you a hard time? Do you have one of those people in your life, and do you respond? How do you respond to them?
Get the rocks out.
That's get the rocks out. He said, get the rocks out. 5 of them at least, and get your slingshot, right? And the power of prayer is really important in this kind of a time. And so that's, again, where do you turn? You turn to God and to godly people. Does God send you a Jonathan for your help and encouragement? I think sometimes he does. And by Jonathan, I mean someone that encourages you. I think that's what happens in the church a lot, is that we have other church members that come to our aid when we are in trouble. We rely on them because they love us, we love them. As in this message that Ron had today, they put us above themselves and vice versa. We submit to each other, and we encourage each other. So sometimes those people are sent to us by God. Those people are put in our lives because God is protecting us and wanting us to be encouraged. Philippians 2, verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. That's maybe a description of David, but it's certainly not a description of Saul. But it is a description of what we're supposed to have. We're supposed to be humble. we're supposed to put other people above ourselves. So that's the end of the lesson. Any comments or questions before we're dismissed? Thoughts? All right. Well, thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.